Hi, this is Community Global Internet Radio. I'm Dian Kiser, and you're listening to Observations and Perspectives, short segments about the contemporary American experience. Today is not Throwback Thursday, but we'll be digging into the past, the 1960s. Terrie Klaft Walsh, also known as Terrie Walsh, is with us. She and I had the honor of serving in VISTA together, Volunteers in Service to America, also known as the Domestic Peace Corps, back in the 60s. That's the 1960s. Today, the program is called AmeriCorps, and it's still going. The 60s was a time of turmoil, disruption, and the war in Vietnam was raging and controversial. Along with the civil rights movement, assassinations, and societal evolution, there was a time of intensity for many in this country, especially young people in America. Terrie Walsh, welcome to Observations and Perspectives. Thank you for joining us today from Amelia Island in northern Florida.
Hi, Diane. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Hey, Terrie, tell me, what was your main motivation for joining VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, back in 1967?
You know, when I was just listening to the introduction and everything, and you were explaining what things were going on in the world, I kind of see it as a crisis through a chaotic motion, that it was a decade that started out with John Kennedy in 61 telling us to do something. You know, if you don't like what's going on, then do something. Don't ask us, find something for you to do. And I think that kind of set the tone for the 60s. And then on the home front, and then on the national scene, we had a lot of conflict starting to erupt throughout the world, which was a very different experience for us because we had just the baby boomers who were now in their 20s, had just gone through the 50s where we had Father Knows Best and a very kind of calm after World War II lifetime experience growing up. So we go into these chaotic years of the 60s where women have an opportunity by and large to go to college and to look and explore different occupations and careers, areas that were not really open to women, previous to the 60s. So with the chaos that erupted at home, we were looking at an ongoing Vietnam War that was escalating in the mid-60s and racial tension that was escalating as well throughout our country. We had riots in Watts in LA, Detroit, major cities were rioting and on fire. And we just had this kind of unrest going with no clear solutions on how to calm anything down. We had 450,000 guys or women over in Vietnam. So there was a lot of protesting about the continuation of that war and the purpose of that war. And so in looking at all of that, and I was very young, I was actually 19, I went off to college and I thought, I listened to Joan Baez and she said to get out there and to do something. And that's what I decided to do. I was majoring in social work. And I thought, you know what, right now, I probably need to get out there and see what's going on.
I remember those days. And what was it that Joan Baez said?
She said, don't sleep with a draft card carrier, which I think a lot of women in that audience really didn't know how to take that at the time,
Right.
Because there were not, at that time, there were not a lot of choices for men who were getting drafted, of other ways to deal with the government. They could put in for a student deferment if that was accepted. They could go to Canada with the idea that they may never be allowed to re-enter the United States. They could go to jail and they could apply to be a conscientious objector, which there was a whole big brouhaha with Muhammad Ali, who did stand up, with his faith as a Muslim and he was stripped of his titles, but he didn't have to fight. So so for women, we had to look at all this and try to figure out where we stood and exactly define a role for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was it was a time that we'll probably never maybe go through again the way we did. Some of it was a reaction to the 1950s, which was such a sterile environment, and an environment where people were locked in to roles and locked into ways of life and existing. And I think that through the 60s and into the 70s, because I think a lot of the 60s carried through into the 70s and made for some real change. And the National Urban League, formerly known as the National League on Urban Conditions Among Negroes, is a nonpartisan historic civil rights organization that's based in New York City and advocates on behalf of economic and social justice for African Americans and against racial discrimination in the United States. It is the oldest and largest community-based organization of its kind in the nation. What was your opinion of our VISTA training conducted by the Urban League? Do you feel it prepared us for service in communities of color in the South in the 1960s?
We were so fortunate that was the group that sponsored us and allowed us to all come in and kind of invade, their territory. I mean, we were by and large a group of white very middle class kids in our early 20s coming in to try and do some kind of good, but most of us couldn't define what that really meant because most of us didn't have any understanding of the culture and the politics of the South. It was a real eye-opener. I think the Urban League, accepted us very gracefully and guided us as best as they could to give us some idea of what to expect and how we could kind of fit in, and how we could define our role and how they saw us fitting in. So they were, and especially in Atlanta, which was, it was incendiary. It was just very, very, very tough times there. A lot of anger.
Just the aura of Atlanta at the time was very, a lot of paranoia. And especially when anybody was trying to cross a color line, that was when they were seen, both blacks and whites were seen as absolutely dangerous in many ways. And what they were doing was totally controversial, unlike today. And today it's gotten a little better, but we're still dealing with so many of the problems that we were dealing with in the 60s. And it has improved. There's been some improvements, but we have a lot to do. We're going to take a break for a minute, and we will be joining Terrie Walsh in a few minutes to do the second segment, Perspectives and Observations. Terrie and I were just talking about the training that we received as VISTA volunteers, Domestic Peace Corps volunteers in the 1960s, and it was conducted by the National Urban League in Atlanta. And what they tried to do was to make it possible for us to be at least partially effective working in communities of color, because things at that particular time were so identified as either white or non-white. It was an amazing time. And those of us, Terrie was from the northern tier in the United States. She's from Lincoln Park, Michigan, and I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. So we experienced nothing like we experienced in the South. And just the fact that we had to be careful, and we were so naive, we didn't know just how careful we had to be. But there were times when we were told that we could not drive from Atlanta, Georgia to Miami, Florida with 3 white women and 1 black woman. It would be too unsafe for all of us in 1967 to do that. So the black women had to fly and the white women drove. And so we could not appear together. That gives you an idea that things have changed. I mean, it's been slow. And we thought, Terrie, chime in here, didn't we?
Yeah.
Think that we thought maybe by the time we were done, maybe the 70s, America would be integrated.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
I know. I think that the difference, as you're talking about, the parts of the country that we came from, and the majority of the volunteers who were all very middle class and all do-gooders, coming into this training down in Atlanta, we're so naive. And what I don't think we were really was registering was that we were white people living in a colored neighborhood, and that's what it was called, a colored neighborhood. So while we thought we were accepting, we weren't really being accepted. And there were circumstances and incidents that happened, Di, that you can talk about, that happened to us. One that sticks out of my mind is that we knew that there was a car outside the building where we were staying in this colored neighborhood, colored quote unquote area. And we were seen as some kind of subversive group.
I also remember being shot at by the Ku Klux Klan because we had a number of VISTA volunteers who were maybe a bit more aware. Someone had the mind to push a few of us who fortunately ducked a bullet. And these were things that we really had no idea we were going to encounter. And
Right.
The Urban League tried their best to prepare us for these things. Even the fact that the Urban League tried to prepare us for being confronted by white mobs and spit at. And they
Right.
somehow got together a cast of people who looked like a white mob, and we role played. And this was an amazing experience. And it prepared us for some of our encounters later on.
Yeah.
Yep. Hey, Terrie, let's move on to, now that we're peeling away the years, let's talk a little bit about what stood out as the greatest learning experience that VISTA provided for you. It's been an amazing thing when it comes to looking at integration and assimilation in today's America. And also, if you could just add, in your opinion, what do you think we've done regarding like assimilation and integration in today's America? We've got a ways to go.
Yeah, we certainly do. I think, I'm a big proponent of one-on-one change and communication between two people. So going back to that phrase out of the song that nobody's right if everybody's wrong.
Right.
And I think to create change, we have to start on a very one-on-one kind of level. So for me, for VISTA, I had two different experiences. I had the experience of being Atlanta, which was the deep South and everything that we're talking about here. And then our time for the year that we had in Miami, which was, again, another culture. And we can talk about that experience. So it was all in all. And then I went on, after my year, I was called Washington, who was preparing a report for Congress on the program, on the VISTA program after 3 years for appropriations for additional funding. And I was hired as an ex-volunteer to go out around the country, travel to various VISTA sites and interview volunteers on location. So I got to see a variety of placements for VISTA volunteers and how effective and how national this program was in its attempt, to create change. Mm-hmm. So for all of us who had that experience, and whether it be on an Indian reservation, up in Alaska, in Anchorage, at a drug rehab in Wisconsin, there were so many different opportunities to do one-on-one work and create and affect change. And hopefully that went with all these baby boomers and carried forward.
Absolutely. I think that there were so many learning experiences in VISTA that it's just hard to pin one down. But I would think that for me, that we were able to actually spend time in communities of color, and after some period of time, there was a certain amount of acceptance. And the fact that in the United States, people of color have not had really good relationships or any relationships.
Yeah.
It's interesting that 70% of white people do not have an African American or a person of color in their social group. 70%,
Yeah,
So
that's amazing. Yeah.
that was, I think, one of the things for me that opened up was that I could be part of a community of color. I could join with them, and we could organize together and do things. And after my first year in Miami, Florida, my second and third year was spent in Gila Bend, Arizona, as a VISTA volunteer working on the Totono O'odham Reservation, and also working with African Americans and the Hispanic community in Gila Bend. And sometimes I would get the question, hey, did you actually know that you're living on the other side of the tracks? That you're not living in the white community? And I said, gee, yeah, I have noticed that. And they said, well, what, did you do it by mistake? And I said, no, I did it on purpose.
Yeah.
So I think that there were things that we learned and that have stuck with us since then. You were asked recently to speak at Grandparents' Day at your granddaughter's school about your own experiences growing up in America, especially in the 60s. And what questions did the kids ask you? Were they engaged and interested? And
they were there. Yeah.
Were they?
Go ahead.
And did you talk to them about VISTA?
Yeah, I did. I think it was a real flashback. I think we all look like ghosts, sitting there with our white hair and our beards and bald heads and everything. But their questions were, they were so intense, and they were so interested in hearing about what our life was like when we were 8 and 9 years old. And I could hear answers from grandparents around. We were sitting at the little tables, and we would talk with the group of kids at that table. And so it was amazing. And we talked to them about technology, and we talked to them about politics and about parenting. So we really covered the gamut. And I had the opportunity because Maeve, my granddaughter, had told me that they were studying Martin Luther King. And as it turns out, the school that Maeve was attending is in a suburb of Atlanta. So a lot of the kids had been to the home, Martin Luther King's home, and they were involved in this intense study of Martin Luther King. And I was able to tell them that at the time that Martin Luther King was shot, that I was in Atlanta working on that job for the government of going around to different centers, and had the opportunity that night to go to Martin Luther King's house and to meet Coretta King and the family. And I talked with the kids about John Kennedy and what we all remember when we were teenagers or in grade school when Kennedy was shot, that his message to us when he was inaugurated was to give back, to do for others, to ask how we can help make things better. And that's what VISTA did. And I was so proud to be a part of that program, and that they would have opportunities in their lives, if they look, to help create change and make things better for one another.
That's really an excellent way to end this. And I must say that VISTA AmeriCorps continues. And it is one of the programs, believe it or not, that seems to get support from both sides of the aisle. So we have been many former alums of VISTA and current VISTA volunteers and AmeriCorps volunteers are writing to their legislators and saying, this program needs to continue. one of the major reasons that there is a VISTA was that people realized that there we were going and helping people all over the world, but we weren't helping our own people. And that was
Yeah.
one of the major forms of impetus for the creation of VISTA, and it has made a difference in the lives of a lot of people. So thank you so much, Terrie Klaft Walsh.
I'd like to add one thing.
Surely.
My opportunity to be in VISTA and then to go into Maeve's classroom, her closing comment from Maeve and her little friend was, because of my VISTA experience and being in Atlanta, that I was probably the star grandparent of the day.
Oh my.
I had the best
wonderful.
story.
Exactly. We've always said VISTA pays off. And even in a classroom with your granddaughter and her friend, it did.
Right.
So future segments of Observations and Perspectives will focus on Judge Tom Peterson's work as a VISTA lawyer in Miami, Florida. Terrie and I will join Tom to discuss his observations and perspectives being a member of America's Domestic Peace Corps in the 1960s and his work in civil rights. We hope you will join us. Until then, this is Dian Kiser, wishing you a very assimilated and happy 2021. And thank you again, Terrie Klaft Walsh.
Oh, you're very welcome.